Father, we just thank you and we praise you for this day, this opportunity to go through your word. I just pray, Father, that you be with me and guide my words and guide this study, Father. You are in control and you are King. Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray. Amen.
Amen. And next week, Jan, we will not be meeting.
Since it's Father's Day?
I like to call it Dad's Day, but.
Dad's Day. Yeah, good. Okay.
Male parental unit day.
That's a good one. I like that.
All right. So we are going to be doing the second half of chapter 24 of Acts today into the second half of chapter 25 of Acts today, because I'm now overlapping between chapters. Go figure. But there's not a lot to recap this time, but just kind of really quickly get everybody up to the same place where we left off. So Paul had been held by Felix in Caesarea for 5 days. This is before being summoned to face his accusers. The representatives of the Jewish Sanhedrin were made up of the high priest and Ananias, along with some unnumbered quantity of elders. We learned that Ananias has employed a Roman orator named Tertullus, who is theorized to have been a member of Felix's court, who serves in his capacity to present cases before Felix. In reviewing Tertullus's case, we talked a bit about Tertullus's flowery words and how he took the position on behalf of the Jews, and that this case was beneath Felix's attention, and the matter should be treated as an internal issue. He makes the case, ignoring the fact that Paul is a Roman citizen, that Paul should be tried and sentenced by the Sanhedrin, as the issue is one related to Jewish laws, not Roman laws. So when Paul was finally given permission to make a defense, I pointed out an error in our translation, where it's commonly translated that Paul is cheerfully making his defense, but the Greek suggests more that he's appealing to Felix's knowledge of the political and social events having taken place during his 8 years as governor over the region. So we left off in the middle of Paul's defense after he'd made the case that the words, the law, and the prophets were etched in stone, and subsequently the hope of the resurrection. Would someone like to read the verses 16 through 24 for us?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
So I always take pains to have a clear conscience towards both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without a crowd or a tumult, and some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you and to make an accusation. Should they have anything against me, or else let man themselves say that wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Another man, this said, other than this one thing, when I cry out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before this day. But Felix, having rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off, saying, when
I see it,
that tribune comes down, I will decide your case. When they gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. After some days, Felix came with his wife,
Drusilla,
who was Jewish, and was sent to Paul to hear him speak about faith in Jesus Christ.
All right. So I'm going to start off with this very first verse here and kind of tearing it apart a little bit. So Paul, he's making this case, right, in the face of persecution. He's making an argument that by conscience he's clean. And he states that he asco, or that's to exercise and take great pains, labor, strive. Now, the ESV uses taking pains, but it's certainly a word that has a little bit deeper meaning, right? It's got a little bit more to it than just taking pains, right? That's the laboring, the striving stuff. But what is he trying to strive for? And that is the apiskopon seni disen, And the ascrapon means to have nothing for one to strike against, a smooth road, or metaphorically blameless, right? And it's an adison, meaning the consciousness of anything, or in a very literal sense, the joint knowledge. So it's not really so much about having a clear conscience. To me, what it looks like in the simplest sense is that beyond this clean conscience idea is this, that at a deeper level, that he's saying he's taking pains to avoid placing stones in the path of knowledge. So if he wants people to come to the same knowledge with regards to God and man, rather than necessarily that it's about a clean conscience. It's more about this concept of the smooth road, and I underlined it here as one of the translations that this word can mean. And we think of toward, we think of it in the sense of with regards to in modern English. But really, if you look at the phrasing of it, it's more about in regards to, not in, but more about, the word is pros here, and I didn't highlight it, but pros means it's specifically in a direction or a goal. So again, we have this idea of smooth road towards joint knowledge in a direction being the goal. The goal is God, both God and man. So it's this relationship piece. And so you get the sense that what he is saying here is much bigger than just having a clear conscience. It's not about himself so much as it is about this path that he's on. And I really like that a lot more, because I think it has a lot more depth to it. And so, I hope that you can kind of see that, it's a little bit bigger than just what's written there. And go ahead.
I was going to say, if you think about the path, we're always being told that the road to destruction is wide and big, right? But God's righteous path, which is in Proverbs and elsewhere, is narrow but smooth. So in the sense of the word, it's we're looking at basically something that ties more strongly to Scripture than what sometimes we'll translate something, because we're a little lazy.
Right.
Translations.
And you can understand where they get conscience here, right? The fact they're not leading others into sin by one's mode of life. You can understand where it comes from, but it's really a modernized sense of it that takes away, I think, from the actual, what Paul was actually trying to say here to Felix. He wanted Felix to understand that his whole life has been about clearing the path, basically, for others to follow him, to follow along the road. And then he makes a different argument here, a different sort of argument, a reason for his visit to Jerusalem, right? He indicates to Felix, after having been away for many years, he'd come to bring eleimosinas. And that word is typically translated as mercy. Now, it's been expanded by Strong's and others to also then be this sense of alms. But what's interesting here is even Thayer admits that alms is a bastardization of Greek, where they took a Greek word and they fit it into a German word in order to create something that it didn't actually originally mean. And when we look at the modern translation of this word, I dropped it into a Greek translator. It actually means I'm sorry. It's the modern Greek word for I'm sorry. It's a repetitive I'm sorry. It actually means it twice. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Something you would say to somebody when you've done something terrible and you're trying to apologize, or made a mistake. I thought that was very interesting. But I think it does tie back to the older concept of mercy and pity. So what did Paul bring? Now, in the past, there have been references to him collecting charity and things like that to bring to Jerusalem, but we don't have that here, right? He came from Antioch, but it doesn't say that he collected money to bring to Jerusalem, right? So my argument here is that he's not talking about bringing money to the poor. I think he's more about bringing the gospel to the people of the nation, of his nation, because he's saying here that, he's bringing mercy to my nation.
But you know what, the English for alms, the old English on alms mean cheerfully giving. Okay, right. So he came to give to the people cheerfully, a hope, a mercy, you know, like that. That's what he came to bring earlier in his career. And so many pastors missed that. They had a famine in Israel, and they brought money then.
Yeah, but not this time.
They forget that there's been years and years in between.
Yep, and so the fact is that we see alms here, and I was looking through the translations. Most of them say alms. It's been commonly used. Is not the actual word. It's not even a real word in the sense of from the Greek sense. So, you know, and then it afterwards states that, and I apologize, so I did things a little bit differently this time. I went back and highlighted the Greek after I had written things, so I'm afraid I may have missed a few. But what this word offerings that he has here is prophoros, and that's the act of presenting an offering for sin, a sacrifice. So I think people see the word offering there, and then they connect that with mercy, and they think, oh, he's bringing money to give. But no, he's saying here to present his offerings would have been something that a Greek would have understood, which is you come and you sacrifice something. You're killing an animal in the name of the gods, if you will. Well,
there's also the idea in the temple that if you have sinned, you come and bring the poor man brings a young turtle dove. Right. You understand what I'm saying? Yep. But the rich man brings a silver coin.
Or the lamb.
Shekel.
The lamb.
Or the lamb, yeah.
Or bull, depending.
Yeah, so we don't know, because we don't know exactly what he was bringing for the sacrifice. But however, that was what he was doing here, was a sacrifice for sin. So he makes the point that when they found him in the temple, he has found hig nismenon. That's the ceremonially cleansed, is the one who has taken a Nazirite vow. So specifically, again, he's referencing to the fact that he was there to fulfill a vow. So shaved head, not intoxicated, etc. And this contradicts the implications, right, that made by the Jews, as Paul points out. He wasn't part of a crowd or a mob. He wasn't thoribu, that's breaching the public order, making a racket, etc. In ours, we have it translated here as tumult, but it's a little bit more than just that. He wasn't even. And then he also points out that those who were present weren't the ones that made the original accusation against him, right? He kind of breaks his own train of thought here to say Jews from Asia, and then in this next verse, I didn't break it down, but in the next verse, right, then he's saying, but where are they, right? Where are the ones who should be making this accusation, right? Those are the ones that should be standing before Felix, and not the high priest, since it was they who originally made the accusation. So in other words, there's no actual witnesses, right? That's his point. The witnesses are not present. So how can they make an accusation if they're not there? And he continues this challenge with this, in fact, that he had stood before the Sanhedrin. He mentions this here, that they should present his adekima, his misdeed, to Felix, to declare what the witnesses have stated, to recount the testimony against him, which is, I think, what he's suggesting is that really hasn't been done, right? And then rather than wait to see what new charges Tertullus or Ananias might come up with, Paul suggests that he knows the reason he stands here before Felix, right? He likely feels that he can make this case because Ananias was Rhodian, right? And not a member of the Pharisee faction. So he would have been making him a Sadducee, most likely, which means he didn't believe in the resurrection, which again is probably why he was there to make the accusation in the first place. So he puts that up before them, and he makes this statement. He says, I kekroxa, and that's a cry of a raven, and is typically used to refer to when you cry aloud, like you just sort of, I guess the word picture in my mind is when you vomit something out with words, right? You just spew it out, knowing that it's going to have consequence. It's like a raven will sit and just loudly caw. It's the most jarring thing, right? When you're under a tree and suddenly a raven lets loose a caw, right? It's very startling. But that's the word picture that comes to my mind. So he's arguing that that's the reason he's there. And you get the impression that Felix is suddenly getting very uncomfortable with the whole situation. The word Luke uses to describe the response is anabaleto. Anabeleto, which means to throw or toss up in legal sense, deferring decision. And I highlighted here, so the section highlighted in green isn't in the newer Greek, so I didn't have a clean translation of it. But basically, it's saying, now listening to him speak, Felix, and then responded with this response in yellow there, the Anabeleto, the responds by saying, "Whoa, let's back this off," and he defers that decision. And we're told that he knows the akrobesteron, and that refers to exactness, accuracy. It implies that he has an intimate knowledge of the way, the hodon, to a degree more than anyone would have suspected maybe of a Roman governor. And that might very well be why he's getting uncomfortable in the situation. And so continuing to question Paul was to be confronted potentially by his own sins, right? The matter of conviction often drives decision-making by those seeking to escape the power of the Holy Spirit. So he puts off the decision, claiming that he is waiting for Lysias to come down to better explain things. Now, however, as you may recall, I made the case that the commander of the garrison is unlikely to make such a journey under most circumstances, right? He would have to have been recalled and replaced basically to leave his post. And we know from reading ahead, Lysias never comes. Therefore, Felix never actually summons him. So,
but you got to understand, Felix worked on two principles. One is, hey, listen, I've got this right here. Felix, if you will look the other direction, let me go, I'll give you this. You see what I'm saying? Felix was known for that, for taking bribes. Right. The other point is, I would say he's rather in a very tight spot. He knows Paul's status. He knows who the man is. He knows about it. He also knows what's going on. Right. And he feels like he's got no place to turn, but maybe someone will slip him that dollar bill under the table and he can ignore the whole thing.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And then he'd probably say just don't go back to Jerusalem and you're fine.
Yeah, probably. So he gives the order to put Paul under house arrest indefinitely. But because Paul, likely because of his station as a status as a Roman citizen, he gives him some concessions, right? He offers to Paul anison, a loosening or relaxing relief rest. His command also includes that the centurion should not kolein, that's to cut off, cut short, hinder, prevent, restrain, Paul's ideon. Now, the ESV takes a very nice, wonderful little pleasant look at this and says, none of his friends should be prevented from attending his needs. Ideon is referring to property. Specifically,
thank you, Daniel.
Someone in the Roman world and with Paul's status would be assumed to have slaves or servants, though this term specifically would be referring to property such as a slave. So basically, Felix is saying your slaves can minister to you, and it's the attending is ministering. We've talked about that word before. It means to provide for one's needs. So now we know Paul well enough to know that he had servants. We have no suggestion whatsoever that he ever had or owned slaves. That's not to say that he didn't, but we have no reason to suggest that. However, we know people like Luke, Timothy, etc. He had people who ministered to him in the form of almost as servants, right? That they took care of his needs, made certain that he was fed. And in a situation like this, they would not have let him starve, but they also would not have gone out of their way to take care of him. So for him to have any sort of comfort whatsoever, he would have needed to have someone bringing him clothing, bringing him extra food, taking care of his basic needs, bringing him news, etc. Because he's essentially trapped in a room, except when summoned by the governor. He's not going to be allowed to really leave.
So in a sense, the translation of his friends actually is an accurate translation for him.
For him, but not from the Greek.
Not for the Greek, right? Like I said, for him.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to translate this accurately, Felix is saying that none of his slaves should be prevented from attending to him.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes I think that's more important that we look at things from the accurate versus the, oh, it sounds better this way. I personally, well, I've struggled for many years with that concept that we need to know what it says, not what we think we want it to say.
Yep.
Right. And I know, and some of it has been just this big push in the last few years to try and erase the concept of slavery from every source possible, right? And we see it today in our modern culture, you know, that's this battle between not wanting to deny it, but not wanting to acknowledge it. But it has been a key part of, sadly, of society for hundreds, thousands of years, almost from the beginning of time. Slaves have existed. It's only in the last 100 years or so that we've taken a position where we're trying to dismantle those institutions as much as possible, which is great. I think, you know, that's obviously no one should own another. And even, you know, even within the original Israeli society, there was concessions for slavery, though the expectations and the structure around it obviously was much kinder than in the rest of the world.
Well, you could become a part of the family. You could work to become a part of the nation. You could get your freedom after a period of time. We had the Jubilees, so on.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning you could be released and you didn't go out without anything.
Right.
That was specifically for Jewish or for the Israeli slaves. The foreign slaves did not have the option of Jubilee.
No, but they too had rules and regulations, what could be done, couldn't be done. If a young lady was captured in a war and the guy wanted her, she had to become a wife. She wasn't just something that you turned around and tossed away when you got tired of her.
Yeah.
The scripture is very clear about that. People were to be treated as human beings.
Yep.
It's probably the only thing when you look at all the old texts and that actually treated people like people. Nowhere were people treated as if one was greater than another.
Yeah, and the scripture talks about us being slaves to Christ.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, slavery in essence is, well, it's kind of like working for your room and board.
Yeah.
You know, you in the totality of it can be, you know, where they say, well, I own you or you're my property. That's kind of a comfort when it comes to the Lord.
I was thinking that
us being his property.
Yeah.
But not if you're mistreated. That was the point of slavery. I mean, technically, you know, Northerners had slaves too. They just had a different name for them. They called them children.
Well, and
you know, you worked for your room and board. You were expected to, you know, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the problem is in the attitude, and as with everything in our lives, God always brings it back to the heart.
Yep.
And if the attitude is, you know, you're part of my family and I love you and I adopt you in as one of my children, but here's the way the thing works. We all work together and there are certain responsibilities that we have, but there are certain benefits that we get. You get room and board, well, of course, in our history, we've had times where that was very, very much abused. But of course, it's also very much abused in families with children sometimes.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing keeps coming back to how was it used? How was, you know, how was it abused?
Right.
Really.
Right.
So anyway, just to confuse the conversation, I thought I'd throw that in.
You got it.
No, it's good. I mean, it's always, it's a good topic to, I think, to talk about to some degree, because, you know, it is such a hot button these days.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. And we do need to remember the fact is that we are God's property but we choose to place ourselves in that position. You know, we think of it as an indentured servitude in the sense that we're saying we will work for you for eternity in exchange for all the benefits that come with it.
Right, our room and board. That's why we put this little earring in here, and then and that is because we don't want to leave his household. But the alternative is true. There's never been a race of people that did not sell their own people into slavery that I can find in any of the studies. I've got history degrees in that. Everybody has sold everybody else. And some of those people have been badly abused.
Yeah.
So praise God. Go on, Daniel.
So Paul finds himself summoned again to stand before Felix a few days later. However, this time it's not for trial. It's rather to give an account of the gospel. Now, what's intriguing to me about this is that he brings his Jewish wife, Drusilla. Now, you may or may not recall that when I first introduced Felix, I talked a little bit about his relations. Drusilla was the daughter or the sister of a King Agrippa II, who will be coming into the story again here shortly. And Drusilla specifically was wooed away from her original husband when, which was another king that Agrippa had married her off to when he became king of the region that he was over. He was originally over Caesalius, and we'll get to, rather than me trying to remember it, I've got it written further down when he comes up again. So I won't go into too much more there, but that she was Jewish because Agrippa was part of Herod's family. Herod was descended from the Jews. So that is, I think that's an interesting thing. And by him bringing her, I think it puts two possibilities before us. The first is that his wife is the driving force behind the meeting. And that she's the one who wants to learn more, and it has nothing to do with Felix specifically. So that's possibility one. And the second is that Felix sent Paul away the first time to ask more questions about Yeshua, and the presence of the high priest would be to invite more strife with the Jews, to bring back questions as to Felix's ability to be impartial, things like that. Now, I would suspect that scholars probably lean toward the first scenario, and I do apologize. It sounds like there's a group of motorcycles going by outside. Megan's gonna go close our sliding door to try and quiet things down a little bit. That's really loud. The joys of having a busy street right behind our house.
We're not really hearing it, Daniel.
Oh, you're not?
No, I
Okay,
can hear it.
out my ability to think. Sorry.
Okay.
So anyway, I suspect most scholars probably would lean to the first scenario. And I say this because Luke refers to this appearance as paragenemos, and I've highlighted that word here. And that specifically refers to a public appearance. And so Felix had been concerned. I think if he'd been concerned about appearing partial or having the Jews learn about his interest, he would have met Paul privately. Instead, the implication is that Felix summons him to the throne room or the judgment hall, depending upon your perspective, and grills him on what faith in Yeshua means on behalf of his wife. That's my thought or theory here. So we got just a few verses left of chapter 24. If someone would like to read those for us.
I'll read them. Oh, go ahead.
And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. Then, when 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus and desired to do the Jews a favor. Felix left Paul in prison.
I was going to say, it's just kind of a reaction, leaving him in prison, to the other point in the statement that Luke put, well, I didn't get paid, so I'm not going to let him go.
Yeah.
Right. And if we think about it, what does an outgoing governor typically do? He pardons everybody, right?
Right.
Outgoing presidents pardon everybody. So he could have easily pardoned him and sent him on his way before Festus showed up, and it would have been fine. Now, we know from history that Felix was recalled by Nero, and that's why he was removed. Basically, Festus was sent to replace Felix because Nero was no longer happy with his performance. But let's talk about what his reaction is here, because there's quite a bit of interesting things here. Luke refers to his initial reaction or his initial process here as a dialegomenu, and that's the first word here in the Greek rather than the fourth as it is in the English here. And that means to think different things within oneself, to mingle thought with thought, to ponder and revolve around the mind. So based on the details we have, we can assume that Luke was not, I don't think he was present during this exchange, but Paul probably told Luke that he watched as a mixture of emotion played across Felix's face. If you think about it, when people are confronted with something that's very difficult, then many times you can see everything on their face because they're so caught up in their thoughts in the sense of this dialegomenu, right? It's everything's pouring through his mind. And so he's probably, all of this is coming through his face. And so, you get this mixture of emotion. And so he goes through stages. The first is the challenge of the dikaiosynes, the virtue or quality, the state of righteousness. This is that condition acceptable to God. And then he moves on to the requirement of self-control, part of being righteous. And then he contemplates the coming krimatos, the judgment, the condemnation of wrong, typically involving punishment. And then this leads Felix to become emphobos, which is thrown into fear. Terrified is the direct translation here.
He got convicted.
Exactly. He got convicted. And his reaction, though, rather than take action to relieve the fear, he instead chooses to avoid it. He sends Paul away rather than take the action upon what he knows must come next, right? Because once that's the process of the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Once the fear comes upon you, then you have the relief in Yeshua, right? That's what we've all experienced that at some point in our lives is we've gone through that emotion, that understanding, the awakening of the mind, but the relief never comes if you don't turn to him.
He was kind of between a rock and a hard place if he was answering to Nero. He's going to release a Christian.
Yeah. Keep in mind, though, Nero did not turn against the Christians for another, at this point, we're at another 6 years, which I'll actually get to because it does fit into the history here in a moment. Go ahead, Doug.
You kind of wonder, though, even if he hadn't taken action yet, Nero, you kind of know where people are coming from.
Yeah. Yes.
And
yes.
I think
No.
he probably knew this is not a popular thing to do. I'm already in trouble.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Nero is a very complicated character because there's a lot of propaganda around Nero. I do want to get into Nero a little bit because his role in things is rather important. And we'll get to that in just a second with Festus, but before we jump into that, though, I do want to point out one interesting thing. So we don't know for sure that the reason Felix kept Paul to speak with him was related to his expectation of a bribe. I just want to put that clear because we never have any direct recording that he actually asked for money. We only have the assumption that the purpose was money. We know he was known for taking bribes, and Luke clearly believed that was his motivation. However, without that corroboration, it's possible, since it's never recorded that he actually asked for a bribe, it's possible that because Paul's message was intimidating, but also attractive, this is the whole situation, because it says here that Felix kept bringing Paul to him to talk more. And Luke uses the word pike no teron, which means frequent, often recurring, thick, dense, compact. In other words, Paul may have appeared to be one of Felix's favorite guests for conversation. One can assume that Felix stopped expecting money after a point and perhaps began simply to enjoy debating with Paul, who we know from his letters is clearly articulate and well-spoken. So
he could have invited him for dinner for several times a week. You never know.
Yeah. You get the impression from the Greek that at a certain point, I don't think this was about him expecting a bribe anymore. I think it may have been that Paul had become a friend. It is funny that he chose to leave him imprisoned when he left, but however, during this period of 2 years, it's likely the reason why he never resolved the situation is because to resolve it would have meant Paul leaving and him losing maybe someone who had grown to become a confidant and a conversational partner, someone who made him think, challenged him, etc.
I did a little bit of study on how the Roman officials and the others worked with the corruption. So I want to share this because it goes along a little bit and can work with what you've said, is the fact that I would never have personally, for my freedom, handed the money in front of my judge.
Right.
Because that would be acknowledging to the troops standing around the judge is corrupt.
Right.
So they didn't do that. But a friend would come up and request to see him and say, here you are. Let me give you a little bit. You know, Paul needs to be set free. And so he would have received that.
I got you.
Okay. So that is what you find. We do that in our society today. If a judge is in a courtroom sitting there, someone might slip him an envelope and the judge suddenly becomes corrupt.
Right.
That I have seen. But what we have is we don't have an outright in the public handing of the money. And this is the same as back then. So inviting Paul over and over again would not have been for Paul to hand him money, because Paul supposedly had slaves. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And they would have been transporting the money to Felix. So this has to be because, well, maybe he played chess with him. You just don't know.
Right. We don't know. We don't know because this is a situation where only Paul was present. Right. So
right.
These conversations.
Yeah, he certainly would have stopped after like a few weeks, would have stopped expecting a slave to show up with money.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not an idiot.
Yeah.
No, he's very, from everything I read about him, he was a very ingenious, smart man, but he was very corrupt at the same time.
So Luke records for us that Paul lived for 2 years in this fashion in the palace until Felix was recalled to Rome and replaced by Porcius Festus. Now, who is Porcius Festus? Now, according to historians, most likely he was appointed this position in Judea around 60 AD. He inherited all the challenges left by Felix, and mainly that growing tension between the Jews and King Agrippa. The second, which would eventually lead to the Jewish War of 66 AD. Now, Festus was only governor of Judea until 62 AD, at which point he was replaced by Lysias Albinus, who only lasted himself for 2 years. Festus, in fact, died after only 2 years in Judea. So within 2 years of his arriving, he's dead. Now, the thing that's interesting, I had a hard time finding the corroborating evidence of it. But so there's just not a lot of details about Festus. He was a kind of a blip in history. But what I did find suggested that he was more honest than Felix. And that some have suggested that he might have actually helped diffuse the region had he lived longer. But we do know from historical records that Felix was being recalled by Nero due to negative reports received, possibly sent by the Jews. And even in relationship to his refusal to issue judgment on Paul could very well have driven this whole situation. So you note that, again, after 2 years, we never see the continuation of the trial. Lysias instead never shows up, never attends Felix in Caesarea. Paul continues to languish. And subsequently, rather than resolving the cases might have made sense under the circumstances, Felix instead leaves Paul in prison in an attempt to curry favor after the fact. And this might have made sense for Felix to bring Paul with him to Rome. Just something that occurred to me. But yet, though Paul hadn't yet demanded that audience with Caesar, he still could have, theoretically, Felix could have just taken him with him, right? That would have been an option.
I think it boils down to, and this is where we're not certain of a lot of circumstances, but I think his wife played a big role in all of it.
Yeah, I suspect she probably did. Yeah, that's why I leaned towards that earlier too. All right, so chapter 25, we are getting into that now. Someone like to read our first 10 verses for us?
I'll read them.
Okay.
Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, "Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense." But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me?" But Paul said, "I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well."
Yep. All right. So I don't think should be a surprise that Festus's first act after only 3 days in Judea was to head to Jerusalem, right? It is, after all, the center of the world. Not the Roman world, of course, but in the reality of the day, being the religious capital of the region, home of the high priest and a holy place of the Jewish people whom Festus was to rule, it certainly wasn't a surprise, right? The 3 days he spent in Caesarea were likely the passing of responsibilities for Felix, learning the basics, collating the key information, who is important, what events are taking place. Festus would need time to establish himself amongst the Romans, set the command structure, etc. So Luke records for us that the Icares and the Protoi Jews, the chief priests and the principal men, or also
Sanhedrin.
the Protoi being the first in rank, the chief. What's that, Dad?
Well, I was going to say it would have been those that sat in the Sanhedrin at the time, the top men. Like,
Right.
well, it wouldn't be Gamaliel, because Gamaliel was never, from what I can find in history, an so it wouldn't have been him. But it would be those of high rank in the study, like we have the high-ranking rabbis now today.
Yep. And they make this anathanesen, and you can see that the exhibit in the Greek was the first thing, the exhibit of these men, basically. They're making their declaration, they're doing an appearance. So part of this whole thing is he's meeting with all the officials of the city. So you're getting this the sense of it, and they make this entreaty. They used in the ESV, they use the term urged, but the Greek is more of a begging, right? A calling for, a summoning, a beseeching. So this is essentially, they're making this plea to him that against Paul, that they're asking him then to as a favor. And I do find it interesting that the term for favor is charon, and we keep seeing this pop up again and again. I didn't highlight it before, but it was the same word that was used with regards to Felix with relationship to the Jews. And it's the word also that we use for grace. It's this idea, this favor. They're supposing they can convince Festus to have Paul sent to Jerusalem. Their intent, of course, we know from this, is to ambush Paul, kill him en route. Right? It's been 2 years, a governor later, so they're hoping maybe Festus will not even know about the original attempt to perform something similar in Jerusalem previously. However, you get the impression that maybe Felix warned Festus ahead of time to watch for the deceitfulness of the Jews, because he informs them that Paul is to be kept in Caesarea, and that's the terming here is this idea that he's to be kept there, where Festus declares that he's planning to leave for at this time, so he invites them to come with him. He insists that specifically those in power can come down to make an accusation. And he states if Paul has atopon, anything wrong about him, something out of place, unbefitting, improper, wicked, etc. Interestingly enough, atopon isn't found in the older Greek manuscripts. So if we take the word out, what we get here is basically he's just saying that if you have any accusation against him, come and bring charges. That's the older Greek. That's what they're saying. It's not that it's not that important, but the word wrong wasn't in there. It wasn't originally part of it. It was added probably because they felt like, well, if they're going to make an accusation, there has to be a type of accusation. He's just saying, you got anything to accuse him of, come make the accusation. Important, I don't know. Just thought it was interesting. So, knowing that Felix had left Paul in prison in the palace, I'm a bit surprised that Paul had not been brought before Festus prior to Felix's departure, in order to give Felix a chance to present Paul in his case to Festus. I thought that was interesting. But we know here from verse 6 that he must not have, because after Festus returns from Jerusalem, he takes a seat in the halls of judgment and summons Paul to answer for himself. So he clearly recognized that Paul must be important, or the leaders of Jerusalem would not have come to him in such a way as to beg for Paul to be brought to them for trial. So it wasn't clear from earlier in the passages, but we learn now that many Jews from Jerusalem came. From Luke's account, they paristisen, and that word literally means to stand around, surrounding someone. It can also mean to avoid or shun. So think of it like being in a crowd of people yelling at you, but they're all keeping their distance. Nobody wants to be associated with you. They stand all around Paul, and these people, they're making this baria etiomata against Paul. Baria being a heavy, burdensome, severe, stern, or weighty, and etiomata being accusation or charges of guilt. All the charges are bearing down on Paul. However, Luke is quick to point out that these charges were not apodixai, and they can't be proven. Adodixai, is the proof. Proved by arguments, proved by what kind of a person anyone is, point out, show forth, expose. It's the act of pointing away from oneself. So you're putting the blame on someone. And the previous words, the uk iskoi koan, means not able to prove. So they're just if you think about it, they're basically calling him, as the colloquialism from the South, calling him everything but a son of God.
But they're attacking him by hearsay, by other things.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I heard, and this is what I heard he did. And so, when you get down to it, well, you heard. And I remember talking to one person. This was on something. What was it? A few years ago, supposedly we had this device in Alaska that can control the weather, right?
The heart.
Right, the art. And I asked the person, I said, oh, you've seen this? Oh, no, it's top secret. I haven't seen it. Okay, how do you know it exists? Well, my friend told me about it. I said, well, your friend. I got the name. I knew the guy. I said, he saw it. Well, no. His friend told him about it. I said, his friend told him about it. By the time I'd gotten past 5 friends, going, each one had told each one, and one of them had gotten in an email.
Yeah.
Nobody had ever seen it, but it became a big thing on the net and a big thing among certain groups of Christian people that we had this ark, and our current administration was going to destroy our country with it. And I'm going, excuse me, no one's seen it. We don't have that. It'd be great to use on our enemies if we had it. We could turn their countries into icebergs and do away with them. But no. I wish we did have such an animal, because we could control the heat or the cold or the lack of rain or whatever, but it's what was being said, and it has flooded Jerusalem.
Yeah. So Paul, he's again forced to defend himself. He declares that he has not hemarton, or missed the mark, erred, been mistaken, committed wrongdoing against the nomon. So in the Greek, we have 4 contradictions. We have the nomon, and then the nomon being the law of the Torah, basically, or the law of the rabbis, the Jews, the temple, or Caesar. So just as he argued before Felix, Paul is making it clear that the accusations against him are without merit, witness, or evidence. And so hearing all of these accusations, we see Festus make an about-face from earlier position. He decides that maybe he can curry favor with the Jews by giving them their wish to have Paul brought to Jerusalem for a separate trial. I appreciate that he doesn't just declare it, however. He continues to give Paul a certain amount of respect that is expected as Paul's a Roman citizen. He asks him if he's teleus, and that's resolved. In this, we have it translated as, do you wish to go? Because that it can basically mean, essentially he's saying, are you willing? Not you will go. So give him that much credit. And then the word here is krithine, and that means to basically involve opinion. He's basically saying, if you'll go to Jerusalem, I will make a pronouncement with regards to this case. And I'm sure in his mind, he's thinking, I'll make them happy by bringing him to Jerusalem so that they can have their trial. And then I will set him free, because the trial this is all a farce. And we get that later when he's talking with Agrippa. He recognizes what's going on to some degree. But Paul, however, he knows what it is in reality, right? Because he knows these people, these men. And so he makes this statement. He said, it's a continued delay of justice, right? It's like cases like this are what have led to, in the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the right to a fair and speedy trial. Between Felix and now Festus, there's been continuous drawing out of this event to the detriment of Paul, who's been trapped as a prisoner now for more than 2 years. And he rightly points out that at that moment, he's standing before the bimatos, the seat of judgment of Caesar, surrounded by his accuser. Paul wants Festus to make his judgment then and there, so Paul can move on to one in one fashion or another, right? He makes this statement that Festus has complete knowledge of Paul's innocence. And I imagine it's likely pretty obvious that the accusations being made were far-fetched and unbelievable. Perhaps even to the point that Festus would have known that if any were true, Felix would have acted to punish Paul long ago, right? At this point. All right, not sure if we've got enough time, but let's go ahead and keep moving, and we can always pick up where we leave off. Would someone like to read these verses for us?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. Now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out the case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accuser face to face and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in this case of such evils as I supposed.
So Paul is now laying it all on the table. He's tired of waiting for the men. The men in power to act, and makes his declaration. If you believe the accusations against me, that I'm to be put to death, and get on with it. Paul's not afraid to die, but he knows that allowing the Jews to take him to Jerusalem will be good as a death sentence anyway. Remember, Paul had been looking for a way to get to Rome, and he's now found his ticket.
Oh, yeah.
Festus, by refusing to issue a judgment with the looming threat of being dragged away and murdered without a trial, creates an opening that Paul uses. He declares that unless Festus is willing to declare him guilty of a crime deserving death, he will not agree to go with the Jews, and thus appeals to Caesar, a right that he holds as a Roman citizen. And at one point, I did talk at length at what the rights of a Roman citizen were, and that was one of the things. You could always appeal a decision. Now, in this case, the decision hasn't been made, but he's choosing to appeal rather than await for a decision. He had the right. He could have chosen to say, no, I will not go to Jerusalem. I will wait for you to make your decision here. But instead, he chose the route that would get him to Rome. So by appealing to Caesar, he's made it clear that he does not agree with the decisions being made in Festus's court. And according to the records we have today, this was his right. Interestingly, though, from what we know of Nero, the emperor at the time, Nero rarely, if ever, actually oversaw appeals and instead tended to defer these cases to other officials. Now, Nero himself is a bit of an enigma. Records are contradictory regarding Nero and his legacy. Now, initially, Nero was extremely popular with the lower classes, in which that tends to contradict the accounts of his ridiculous tyranny and excesses. It was around the time of these events are being discussed that Nero apparently killed his own mother, and nobody quite knows why. And this began a slow slide into madness. Multiple accounts of his life following these events accuse him of more and more depraved actions. You may recall that Nero was accused of burning down Rome in 64 AD, so a mere 4 years later. And popular legend has it that Nero played the fiddle while he watched the city burn, though modern scholars believe this was likely propaganda. Regardless of whether he was actually responsible, Nero deflected the accusations onto the Christians, and that's what begins the massive persecution, and at which point he rounded up and killed thousands of them, beginning one of the worst rounds of persecution. It was Nero who threw Christians into the arenas without weapons to be killed by wild animals. He crucified them en masse and then had them burned alive as human torches. Now, what is interesting, just to add to this whole thing, Tacitus, a reliable historical source, placed Nero in Antium at the time of the fire and recorded that he returned immediately to coordinate aid and relief to the people displaced by the fire. And it is likely that Paul himself was ultimately a victim of Nero's purge of Christians, because it was around 64 AD that Paul is believed to have been beheaded. So anyway, a little bit of history. Now, Festus, like many men of his status, is described here to have a council of advisors. And after he discusses Paul's case with them, he determines that they must honor the request, right? He's likely looking to see if there's some way he could still give the Jews what they wanted under the circumstances. However, Paul obviously is placed in a position that could not be avoided, right? He can't deny Paul's request. And then Luke indicates that some indeterminate amount of time passes when King Agrippa arrives with his sister, Bernice. Now, it doesn't specifically refer to her as his sister in this, but that is who Bernice was, because King Agrippa had 3 sisters, Bernice, Drusilla, and I didn't write down the name of the third. But King Agrippa, called Herod Agrippa II, was born Marcus Julius Agrippa, and he was the 8th and last ruler of the line of Herod. Excuse me. Though by this point in time, the line of Herod held little more than a ceremonial position, the King Herod. And it was Agrippa's sister Drusilla, who had been married to Felix. Interestingly enough, Agrippa was actually king over Batanea, Trachonitis, Gaulonitis, and the king of Lysanias and Albia. Basically, what we're talking about here is all of the region east of the Jordan is where he was ruler over. And interestingly enough, the gossip at the time was that Agrippa was actually involved in a relationship with his sister Bernice, which is likely explained why he was traveling with her, because she was the only one that he didn't marry off when he became king. And, you know, Agrippa's visit to Festus, it was likely a standard visit of state. He was welcoming the new governor to the region, considering Agrippa's relationship with the previous governor. He's ultimately, you know, and then interestingly enough, he was ultimately deposed when he sided with Rome against the Jews during the War of 66 AD, which I'd mentioned previously. And so you can kind of see how all these events seem to be building toward that particular war, right? All these decisions that are being made by the Romans are just building more and more animosity between the Jews and Rome. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the chapter here quick, even though we're just about out of time, assuming my voice doesn't keep dying on me. So, you know, during the visit, I do find it very interesting, because during this visit, we had this summary Festus puts together of his experience with the events. Because the topic of Paul inevitably comes up. You know, he mentions that Felix left Paul to be Festus's problem, and I'm sure that Paul vexed Festus, right? He's a man in prison with seemingly little reason for so long, left in the palace. Festus thought he was doing the right thing by attempting to resolve the case in a way that would make everyone happy, not realizing the full extent of what was going on, right? He goes on to relate the events that occurred in Jerusalem, the request for judgment, and, you know, he seems to be expanding upon his position with the Jews, but, you know, he did invite them to come. He makes their accusation against Paul. And here we have, you know, he's admitting that the cases was really that they had no real accusations, clear accusations, you know, and that, you know, he understands that they expected Paul to be given to him without question. He talks about this trial and pointing out that the Jews came back with him to Caesarea and it took no delay. And amusingly enough, to Agrippa, Festus admits that none of those accusations were credible. And he refers to the accusations being without evidence of wickedness. And so, you know, we kind of get to that point and wrapping things up. Next time we'll go continue with Festus's recount to Agrippa, the subsequent trial of Paul before Agrippa and Bernice, and that'll probably take up all of our next time with Acts.
And of course, for everybody, Chris and Trevor, Dad's Day, I guess, is coming up Sunday. And so we are not meeting this next coming Sunday, so that everybody can have time with family if they want it. We'll meet the Sunday after that.
And then after that, it will be the 4th of July weekend. And Megan and I will be traveling. So I think I believe the plan is to take that week off. And then we're going to have to figure out if Vuri may be doing 2 in a row, because Megan and I will still be traveling the following week. But we'll be able to maybe sign in. Not 100% sure, because we have a flight that day.
They're going to the East Coast, Jan, to
Oh,
visit
okay.
family. They're going to go to a place called Florida. Never heard of it before to start with.
The Florida lands.
Yes. So yeah, we're flying to Orlando. We're going to go to the villages where her parents live, and then we're flying up to Newport News, North
Okay.
Florida, to visit with some other family. But why don't we close out the study? Someone would like to pray quickly to close out the study for us, and then we can go turn out the recording and go into prayer requests. Volunteer? Dad?
I will.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Father, you have been with us. You have much to teach us. We see the agony and the trials of those that have gone before us. Every day, our lives are filled with challenges, and the challenges are getting harder and harder for your people. And we need to be encouraged by those that stood firm and said, no, I won't give in. I'll tell the truth. Father, our country has fallen apart around us. Our people are confused and turning away like sheep without a shepherd. In our churches, they hear and they don't hear. They don't read the book. And even when they do read the book, they don't really comprehend it. Father, you are in charge. You knew this time would come. Laodicea would be a time that the church would be apostate, neither hot nor cold. We turn to you and ask, make us hot, make us lights that shine. And we thank you as you give us your word, it's life to us. And to know that others have walked the path ahead of us, many times into judgment, many times into their own deaths. Father, but they've had the courage from you. And we just bless and praise you and thank you for this time to gather together. In the name of Adonai Yeshua HaMashiach, name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.